Hi, thanks for visiting. I am an author. My name is Max Gilsmeyer, and today I'm going to be reading from one of my novels titled Robert Droll. Here it is. I've got the digital version today. That's what I'll be reading from. There are physical copies available. I'll be linking a way to get those down below. And the genre, well, I don't like to put a genre on it, but there are components of science fiction, mystery, and psychological thriller in this book. So that is the best way to describe it. And I'll start with a little prefatory phrase at the beginning of the book. Everyone on Earth has problems. Only Robert Droll, the star hero, has these particular issues. Part 1, The Starving Artist. Chapter 1, Treading Old Ground. One of his eyes twitched with pulsating regularity. He rolled his shoulders to stave off the tension. He could feel the contrasting air down where the hole in his right pant leg was, by the knee. This only added to the feeling that he was coming down with something. Air mingled with a cold sweat beneath his clothing. That discomfort was made worse by other things. The mounting battery of assaults on his quality of life. Most of all, his thoughts were on autopilot, spiraling down a checklist of all that bothered him. It was hard to stop those feelings once they got fired up, once they got excited. His mind could be such a traitor sometimes. His walk had the look of someone with a leg injury that was troubling them years after the fact. But that wasn't it. No, his asshole itched. His assumption was that it itched because he was unable to adequately wipe it after firing shit into a public toilet some 25 minutes earlier. When he'd first gotten off the bus 45 minutes earlier, his walk had looked like that of a pregnant woman. Then he'd waddled down the sidewalk, butt cheeks clenched, passing several storefronts. None of the clerks behind the counters seemed like they'd be eager to let him use the employee-only restroom so he could, at their mercy, hold his little exorcism. Having too much pride to be turned down in one of those places, he passed them all by. Having gone out of his way to find a public restroom instead of the longer walk home, he didn't give up and at last came to a corner store. After giving the cashier his best refugee expression of plea, he was given the keys with a filthy wooden paddle attached to them and pointed in the direction of the throne room. It was out back in a separate building. When he was finally situated, he'd conducted his business in grateful silence, however unnerving it was to be using the toilet without a seat cover. Upon stepping into the bathroom, he'd made note first of the fact that there were no seat covers, but then also of how little toilet paper was left. Everything's impossible. He'd forgone using any of the toilet paper as seat covering with some reluctance. Then, finally, a several-minute-long quietude in a bathroom that was serviced by a dim, stuttering light that seemed to be in sync with his twitching eye. During this time, he became aware of various permanent marker graffiti on the walls. But, not interested in viewing a caveman depiction of a woman spreading her legs, he kept his eyes averted toward the begrimed floor. While sitting there, he saw himself as the adult protagonist of a silent-era slapstick film. Somewhere in the void around him, a comfy theater audience snickered between the chewing of buttered popcorn. The comedy of errors was, of course, only in his head. He surely knew there was nothing funny about being huddled over a men's room toilet, firing shit with the sounds of it echoing up and down tiled walls. At last he handed the wooden paddle and its key back to an unenthused gas station attendant and shuffled away. Hopefully he'd shuffle into forgetfulness of the entire episode. Robert, the hapless hero of his own internal melodrama, was soon passing the bus stop he'd originally gotten off at, but was still nearly a mile from home. It had sure been a fearsome case of the shits. He'd barely had a nip of whiskey the night before, but of course, booze's effects accumulate over time. Now, here he was, on an unseasonably mild August day. In fact, Robert reckoned it wasn't even t-shirt weather, but more on the cold side. He looked forward to being back in his musty shack of a house, with an anticipation he'd not felt in some time. Months, at least. What to do when I get home, he wondered, but no answer ever came to him. Instead, after his long, conspicuous walk home, he found his mind in a daze while his body drooped along a saggy couch. Not too deep down in Robert's mind, there was an angry stream of rhetoric being shouted from a hoarse throat, undecipherable other than its obscene nature. It seemed there was a relentless little man with a chip on his shoulder raging on, a voice that would scream unless somehow silenced. Robert knew why there was an angry man down there. He had had the same shit job for over 2.5 years, but the same low income for a fair stretch longer than that. His home was in a dull, dilapidated part of Aurora, Colorado, which was well below the standards of the neighborhood he grew up in. His shoes were in need of replacement, yet they were among his newest possessions. He had once considered himself reasonably well off, but those days now seemed as though they were retreating forever. Around his house were indicators of the person he thought he'd been at some point, before he'd begun to fade into the background of his own existence. Cardboard boxes containing books lay around. Novels, illustrative history, space and other science. A notable amount of comic books. Even a few penned and penciled by Robert himself, although those had been unfinished for a long time, and still required a daunting amount of work before they could go to publication. Some boxes remained unopened from his life of over 2 years ago, but he wasn't about to put down any roots by unpacking them. Why? One would have to have their focus to know why. Near a window was his dusty, almost empty bookshelf. Only a plant, second shelf from the top, sat drooping its leaves over the empty space beneath. At least he'd managed to keep the thing alive. 2 bedrooms over, his email was waiting to be looked at. He would have to choose a health plan while open enrollment was still going on at work. He couldn't decide on a plan while looking at it a week ago, so he'd put it off until the last day it was possible to enroll. What a shit ton of money to be deducted from my already crappy paycheck, he'd thought when he'd looked at the deduction per month in his calculator's display. He fell asleep on the couch. When he awoke almost an hour later and feeling fresher, there were things he had a mind to get done. He'd forgotten about the open enrollment, though, and that would go forgotten until it was too late. Rising from the couch, he made his way to the kitchen. Something stirred in his subconscious, but at the moment, only one reality mattered. It was time to make a serious grilled cheese sandwich. Robert placed his skillet on the stove with the reassurance one would imagine belonging to a chef on a cooking show. After this, he pulled margarine from the fridge and some thin, cheap ham slices to add to the sandwich. At that point, the resemblances to fancy chefs vanished. His kitchen floor had little crumbs and sticky spots that bugged him, but the thickening layer, His kitchen floor had little crumbs and sticky spots that bugged him, plus the thickening layer of grime he hadn't mopped in over half a year. It was not of high priority to him. What man of industry, Robert might argue to himself, should mop kitchen floors for God's sake? He was not put on this planet to scrub floors, not even his own. There were loftier pursuits to spend effort on. His personal aspirations were, for a certainty, quite high. He might not look it, but he was ambitious. He had, or thought he had, a propensity for the philosophical, a mind for mulling over the big things and exploring them, perhaps through literary means. It was not just an active imagination. It required an outlet. Not 5 feet away, there was his back porch, and that porch led to the universe. Sometimes there was little to be done about one's dingy surroundings. He made a sandwich in silence. There was no TV or radio in the kitchen. His main media device, besides an ailing computer, was an old CD player that he sometimes plugged into his phone, back in his bedroom. There was a country-like silence to the neighborhood, where only the din of cars could be heard, and you had to listen for it. Within a big city, yet off the beaten path. At least there was that. He stood trying to figure out what important things he'd been meaning to do, so silence was all right. Still, why would he always forget the things he meant to do? What could he be avoiding if that's what it came down to? It had to be something. He knew that he had felt there were important matters to attend to as he walked home from work, but it all just seemed less urgent now. It faded. Being indoors had woven that spell on him time after time. There was the now laughable notion that he'd considered getting weed killer while at work, then going to town on it with it. There was the now laughable notion that he'd considered getting weed killer while at work, then going to town with it on his driveway and front walkway. But in this neighborhood, 100 gallons of gasoline and a match would be more appropriate. Half of his neighbors kept dirt lots as well. A couple of days ago, he remembered that he'd intended to get more clothing hangers, yet now it seemed that his floors had more than enough space to spread his clothes around on. Why bother? The sandwich had that beautiful brown he liked so much when he spatulated it onto the plate. Robert sat in contemplation as he didn't so much eat, but delved into his grilled ham and cheese sandwich. 1 slice of Colby Jack, 1 of mild cheddar, with 2 ham split. Bitch. Robert sat in contemplation as he didn't so much eat, but delved into his... Faggot! Read it. Okay? Robert sat in contemplation as he didn't so much eat, but delved into his grilled ham and cheese sandwich. 1 slice of Colby Jack, 1 of mild cheddar, with 2 ham slices splayed between and all cooked in margarine. It was a time-honored recipe, the Robert Droll special. He washed it down with a glass of knockoff sugar water. Robert rotated his... Faggot. Okay. Robert sat in contemplation as he didn't so much eat, but delved into his... This is not funny. Robert sat in contemplation as he didn't so much eat, but delved into his grilled ham and cheese sandwich. 1 slice of Colby Jack, 1 of mild cheddar, with 2 ham slices splayed between and all cooked in margarine. It was a time-honored recipe, the Robert Droll special. He washed it down with a glass of knockoff sugar water. Robert rotated his flavors of sugar water more often. The sandwich and the last ounce of his drink needed to be finished almost perfectly in sync so that his mouth wouldn't need a rinsing, but also so that it wouldn't completely wash out the taste of the cheese. He did this with a practiced grace that would accompany him if he was ever a judge on one of those reality cooking shows. Then, at once, all seemed pretty well with the world. His couch beckoned to him, and he drifted toward it like a vampire to its coffin at sunrise. And that is chapter 1. I will be probably diving into chapter 2 soon. This chapter, well, it doesn't have any dialogue in it. The book is not without dialogue, but this one has no character-to-character dialogue. So, it's weird. I didn't plan it that way. But, on to chapter 2.